Number 10. Eel monster. In South Carolina, some very disturbing eel monsters have been discovered on the beach. It happened when two local residents were walking together, enjoying some peace and quiet and the sound of the waves. Then, they saw a head poking out of the sand that didn't look quite right. It turned out to be a disgusting silver eel monster. Wouldn't you be surprised to see a nightmarish creature pop up on your pleasant walk? How would you react? They were astonished. After visiting the same beach for 5 years, they had never seen anything like it. But the terror continued. Throughout the rest of their walk, they witnessed at least 12 creepy eels hidden underneath the sand, peeping out at them with their shifty eyes. In fact, the duo compared the creepy eels to the monsters from the movie Tremors in 1990, just a bit smaller. They were so freaked out by the beach creatures that they took pictures of them and uploaded the photos online, at which point the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources identified them as shrimp eels, which are a type of snake eel. They bury themselves in the sediment and then feast on whatever critters come by. The reason they aren't usually seen by people is that they embed themselves at the bottom of the sea, not on the beach. Something odd must have occurred in order to put them on the beach that fateful day. Number 9. Xclass midget submarine. In Scotland, an old World War II Xclass midget submarine was found rotting on the beach, its hull rusting, and its interior crusted with barnacles. The Xclass was built for the Royal Navy between 1943 and 1944, referred to back then as X-craft. Why were they called midget submarines? Well, these machines were about 45 feet long and powered by a small 4-cylinder diesel engine. But these submarines couldn't really operate by themselves. They were towed by larger submarines, and a crew of 4 men had to exit the main submarine and use a dinghy to row out to the midget sub, at which point they would sail to their target and then return to the main submarine. These were used like small alien vessels, always returning to the mothership. They didn't carry torpedoes, but instead had explosives that they would place beneath the target while undetected. These explosives would sit under the other ships without offering any advance warning of their power, then suddenly explode once the sub had gotten out of the way. The corpse of the X-Class on the beach was towed to Aberlady in 1946 and moored to a concrete block, then used as target practice. The submarine is still there, but it seems like it's only a few years away from deteriorating completely. Number 8. Jelly monsters. At Newport Beach, strange jelly monsters have been freaking people out. These jelly creatures are usually found in the southern hemisphere, but have been spotted recently by unsuspecting beachgoers, most of whom didn't really know what they were looking at. The creatures in question are gelatinous, bright blue, and look kind of poisonous. They're known as by-the-wind sailors, and they have gooey, purple tentacles that writhe and contract as they feel for food. They're called sailors because these little goo monsters have a sail, kind of like a mohawk, which helps them to navigate across the ocean's surface. But the appearance of the jelly monsters is not a good sign. They have only been sighted here a few times in the past several decades, but with ocean temperatures rising, they seem to be washing up on the shore more frequently. Between 2014 and 2016, when the ocean got incredibly hot, thousands of them washed up on the beach, all the way from San Diego to Washington. And now the same thing is happening again, suggesting something not very sustainable or healthy is going on in the ocean. California beaches are now plagued with jelly monsters. And yes, in case you weren't scared already, they do have venom. However, they're pretty unlikely to do any damage to a human. Number 7. Hundreds of skeletons. Medieval remains have been found hidden underneath the sand on the Welsh beach. Beginning in 2014, the Dyfed Archaeological Trust has been excavating the small stretch of coastline, trying to get to the bottom of why the locals began to see skeletons poking out of the sand. The skeletons discovered have been dated back to around the 8th century, and archaeologists believe they were once part of a Christian community that lived here on the coast. So far, 210 skeletons were found between 2014 and 2019, and 110 were uncovered in 2021. People were buried here 1,400 years ago, before being forgotten. The locals had no idea there was a literal cemetery on their beach. Families have been frequenting the beach for decades, unknowingly having picnics and romantic walks over the bones of the dead. It's not clear what exactly happened in the Christian village that once called the beach home. Perhaps the water levels began to rise and they were forced to flee. Or maybe they just slowly deserted their village. Could they have been victims of a plague or famine? We just don't know. Either way, they left behind the walls of an old church, as well as many remains of their buried dead. Number 6. Eyeball creatures. A terrifying creature that looked like an eyeball monster was discovered by Jennifer Balthazar in Texas while she strolled along the beach with her young son. She actually found the weird monster because her son complained about a stinging sensation in his foot. She was trying to find what her son had stepped on, fearing that he may have touched a deadly poisonous creature. That's when she found the thing that looked like an eyeball. It was a kind of jellyfish blob, which had washed ashore at the Mustang Island State Park. Not knowing what it was and fearing the worst, Jennifer took pictures of the creature in hopes of identifying it. Jace Tunnell from the University of Texas Marine Science Institute recognized the photos and identified the creature Rhizophysa eisenhardti, something closely related to the Portuguese man o' war. It's actually nicknamed the spaghetti monster. The eyeball monster is a type of siphonophore that can sting, though it's not usually fatal. Tunnell said he had never seen one of these creatures washed up before, and is unsure how it made its way all the way to the Texas coast. The ocean is a mysterious place, and animals can sometimes wash up in unexpected places. It's not very likely, but it may even be possible for deadly Australian creatures to wash up on a shore far from their natural habitat, so you can never be too careful on the beach. Number 5. Eagle shark. There isn't much more terrifying than an ancient creature that was a mix between an eagle and a shark. Nonetheless, the fossil of a prehistoric monster called the eagle shark was recently discovered in Mexico at a limestone quarry near the beach, in an area ripe with marine fossils from reptiles and fish. But just what in the world was an eagle shark? According to the Smithsonian Magazine, the monster lived about 95 million years ago, and it was one weird customer. It was a filter feeder and probably didn't move very fast. The creature had great big fins like eagle wings, allowing it to glide through the ocean slowly as it slurped up plankton and other small critters. It was kind of like a manta ray and how it soared through the ocean very peacefully. It was not your typical shark, as it didn't have big shark teeth for ripping and tearing. Still, it was a literal beast. The shark had a wingspan from one fin to the other of 6 feet, making it wider than it was long. Have you ever seen a shark up close in person? What was it like? Were you scared? Tell me your story in the comment section below. Then remember to subscribe if you haven't already for more amazing videos like this. Number 4. Finger creatures. On beaches in California, people have been stumbling upon weird creatures that look like severed fingers. It's been a pretty gruesome couple of weeks, with the odd finger monsters being found in droves on the coastline of San Clemente. Some described them as wiggling gummy worms, while others said they looked like shriveled fingers. They were pushed onto the beach by abnormally high tides and found themselves unable to retreat back into the ocean. But luckily, there were some curious kids nearby who scooped up the disgusting fingers and threw them back into the water. But just what are those finger monsters? Marine biologist Julianne Steers identifies them as tunicates. Each creature is made of many individual organisms, working together as a colony. In fact, each finger creature is built of thousands of individuals, all of them united together to create a tubular structure that looks like a worm. In the dark water, these fingers even glow with bioluminescence as they wiggle around, looking for more organisms to assimilate. Number 3. Naked body. In the United Kingdom, a naked man washed up on the beach in Cornwall, and nobody could identify him. It was a huge mystery, leaving cops stumped as they checked missing people's reports and found nothing related to a dead body with no clothes. The body was actually spotted by some people on vacation at Sennen Cove. The man was wearing nothing but his socks. He was pasty white, around 6 feet tall, and somewhere in his 40s. However, even after the police took DNA samples and fingerprint samples, there was nothing to match them with in the national database. It's been several months now since the dead guy was found lying on the beach, and he still hasn't been identified. Nobody's gone looking for him. There haven't been any sailors gone overboard that might be missing. As far as anyone knows, the man simply appeared from thin air. The only thing the police know for sure is that he died from a traumatic head injury, suggesting he fell off of the side of a cliff, hit his head, and drowned. Number 2. Man-o'-war. Beachgoers in Nantucket were warned to keep their eyes open for a deluge of extremely colorful and very venomous sea creatures that were washing up on the beach. Assistant Harbor Master Mark Hamilton said that 42 Portuguese man-o-wars washed up on beaches throughout Nantucket, and this isn't good. These animals are very dangerous to the public and extremely hazardous when there are young children involved who don't understand not to play with the colorful glob of jelly. But why is the man-o-war so dangerous? First of all, even though it looks like one, it's not a jellyfish. It is a siphonophore, which resembles a Portuguese warship. These animals are usually blue or violet. They float 6 inches out of the water, and they have tentacles that can stretch over 30 feet long on average. But in extreme circumstances, the man-o-war can grow to be over 100 feet long. If a person touches the stinger of this creature, they can get welts all over their skin, extreme pain, and in rare cases, death. And yes, they can still sting after getting washed up on the beach. Be careful what you poke or prod on the beach, even if it looks dead. Number 1. Megalodon teeth. In 2021, Tropical Storm Elsa ravaged the east coast of the United States, and while it did some serious damage to infrastructure, it also pushed some pretty cool artifacts onto the beach. A man named Jacob Danner was looking for any interesting items that may have been washed up by the storm when he found something unbelievable. It was a megalodon tooth, uncovered thanks to the shifting sands and the violent winds of the storm. It measured about 4 inches long, uncovered at Fernandina Beach. It was exciting for Jacob, as finding a megalodon tooth on the beach is for an amateur fossil hunter like striking gold. However, megalodon teeth are not actually worth much money, since thousands of them wash ashore every year, and the museums are full of them. For those who don't know, the megalodon went extinct about 3.6 million years ago. It was one of the biggest monsters ever to roam the ocean, and definitely the biggest shark ever to have existed. The megalodon reached up to 60 feet in length, and there were thousands upon thousands of them swimming in almost every ocean in the world, which is why so many of these ancient teeth can be found simply sitting in the sand at your local beach.
Number 10. Munitions workers. One of the most dangerous and critical jobs from World War I was being a munitions worker. These brave people supplied troops who were battling on the front lines with equipment and ammunition to take down the enemy. During the First World War, a large portion of munitions workers were female, as this freed up more men to be shipped to the battlefield. By the end of the war, there were an estimated 700,000 female munition workers called munitionettes. But it wasn't exactly a fun job. These people worked incredibly long hours and in extremely dangerous conditions. TNT poisoning was a serious hazard. Because munitions workers were filling shells with dangerous chemicals, they'd often get too much exposure to TNT and it would turn their skin yellow. When this happened, they would be called canaries. Plus, the factories themselves were very dangerous. Poor ventilation, asbestos, consistent exposure to harmful chemicals, and back-breaking labor. Number 9. Trench warfare. The men in the trenches battling throughout World War I had what you might think of as the worst job in the entire world. Not only in the war, but pretty much anywhere ever. Trenches were dug as deep ditches, mostly along the Western Front, where German troops and Allied forces battled to gain territory. Trenches have been around in warfare for as long as time, but before World War I, trenches were never actually used before to this extent in armed combat. World War I, also known as the Great War, saw a wide use of trenches being dug into the ground by infantry soldiers who would live inside of them for weeks at a time, relatively protected from the fire of machine guns and artillery attacks raining down from up above. Trenches were hazardous for a few reasons. First of all, chemical warfare and poisonous gas. Gas would sometimes be wafted into trenches, filling them like fog rolling through the city streets. There was also a lot of fighting. Infantry units mounted their attacks from inside the trenches with rifles and bayonets, charging headfirst into no man's land, the area in the middle of the two opposing forces. This often resulted in huge casualties, and whichever force made it to the other side of no man's land and entered the enemy trenches, then it became a brutal and bloody struggle. To give you an idea of just how deadly trench warfare was, look at the Battle of Somme in France. According to History.com, British troops suffered a total of 60,000 deaths during the first few hours of fighting on day 1. Number 8. War dogs. This one kind of breaks our hearts. In World War I, the dogs fought just as hard as the humans. Dogs actually played an extremely critical role and had numerous duties throughout the fighting. One of the most important jobs was guard dog. Just like your dog will guard your house today from intruders, dogs would be used by soldiers on guard duty since they were often a little better at spotting intruders. Secondly, German Shepherds were used as casualty dogs during the war. They were trained to find wounded soldiers on the battlefield. They would have medical equipment strapped to their backs to help the soldiers heal themselves or to allow nearby soldiers to act as doctors. But almost more important than carrying the medical supplies, these casualty dogs would keep soldiers company while they lay in pain on the battlefield, often being their only source of comfort in their final minutes alive. Unfortunately for the dogs, though, the enemy still saw them as enemy soldiers and would often shoot them dead given the opportunity. The dogs on the front lines were in just as much danger as the men in the trenches. How do you feel about dogs in battle? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe if you haven't already. Number 7. The Wiring Party. Being a member of a wiring party in World War I was often a death sentence. These men would creep out of the trenches into no man's land, the desolate space between the Allies and the Germans. The job was one which obviously needed to be done in strict secrecy and silence. They would do so under the cover of darkness to insert wiring posts ahead of the front trench. These posts were about 6 feet, 1.8 meters tall, and had to be hammered into the ground with a mallet or a giant screw-like contraption. Once the posts were placed, wire needed to be tied between them to create fences. The wire fences would prevent enemies from throwing grenades directly into the trench where the soldiers were. This was a huge issue because if enemies could get close enough to the trenches, they could just throw grenades in and blow apart all the soldiers. But putting up the wire was very deadly work. At night, the enemy would fire flares to illuminate the battlefield. If any unfortunate soldiers were caught in the open, they would be cut down by machine gun fire. Where the distance between the enemy front lines was narrow, which was actually very often the case on the trenches of the Western Front, it wasn't unusual for wiring parties of either side to encounter men from the opposing line doing the same job. When this happened, hand-to-hand fighting would often ensue. Number 6. Aviators. When the war broke out in 1914, aviation was in its infant stages. The First World War saw a significant advancement in aircraft warfare. During the first months of the war, airplanes were mostly used by the British as reconnaissance. But as technology advanced very rapidly, planes evolved to join the battle. Pilots would drop bombs from their aircrafts and they would shoot down other enemy planes. Because soldiers were fighting in trenches, it was almost impossible for them to see what the enemy was doing. This meant aircrafts were needed to fly over enemy territory and photograph the situation behind enemy lines. These pictures were critical for the commanders to make the maps of what was going on. But obviously, the enemy didn't like this. Reconnaissance airplanes ended up being targeted by other reconnaissance airplanes and machine guns on the ground. This was definitely not an easy job. Pilots began targeting one another and getting locked in what became known as dogfights. Each plane tried to prevent the other from getting behind enemy lines and taking photographs. There were huge casualties, and it was one of the most dangerous jobs that a person could do. Remember, these planes were open to the weather. There were a lot of biplanes and other old vehicles used, which were dangerous enough to fly without being under constant fire from enemy guns. Number 5. Battlefield medics. Battlefield medics haven't changed much in thousands of years. These brave medical officers rush into the dangerous battlefield to pick up wounded soldiers and take them back to a field dressing station, usually positioned just out of range of the enemy. And while medics were often considered out of bounds, after all, soldiers were still human on both sides, and it was generally agreed that you didn't shoot doctors in the face. They were still under constant threat while trying to evacuate injured people from the battlefield. In the heat of battle, medics could easily be mistaken for other soldiers. This was the #1 reason why it was so dangerous to be a medic. World War I saw the advancement of battlefield medics. By the end of the war, roughly 37 million troops had been killed. Treating those who had been injured was a huge task. So there were 3 working zones for medics. There was the collecting zone where the wounded would be taken from the battlefield, then the evacuating zone at the rear of the battlefield where transport vehicles could collect bodies, and finally the distributing zone, usually where the hospitals would be set up. However, there would always be an aid post very close to the main fighting trenches where the medical officers would be. If a soldier was injured and unable to move, the medic would need to perform their duties sometimes right in the middle of the fighting. Number 4. Tank crews. Tank crews in World War I had a pretty difficult time of it as well. These tanks were primitive, often reaching a top speed of only 4 miles, 6.4 kilometers an hour. Each tank had its own crew, usually consisting of 3 drivers and 4 gunners. The interior conditions were horrendous. It was hot, noisy, and tanks drove like garbage, meaning it was also extremely uncomfortable as the tank rumbled across the uneven earth. Plus, bullets were constantly smacking into the metal plating and tanks were targeted by bombs. The last thing a tank crew wanted was to be blown up inside a hot metal box. While the movies may make tanks look fun, it was anything but. Men were often sick from driving in the tanks. The conditions were so bad inside that the tanks could only make small journeys. The people inside were literally suffocating on fumes and becoming delirious from the intense heat. Communication was also tough, and the tank officer often had to walk outside just to see what was going on. Between August and November of 1918, at least 2,400 men in the tank corps were killed fighting. Number 3. Submarine crews. Submarines were even worse than tanks. Being part of a submarine crew was often a death sentence. It was also a miserable job. According to Popular Mechanics, a typical submarine back then was about 88 feet, 27 meters long, and carried a crew of 23 people. Submarines were armed with torpedoes and 88mm 3.4-inch deck guns. But submarines were in constant danger. There were underwater mines scattered almost everywhere during World War I, all throughout the waters of Europe. These were often undetectable by the submarines, and even a slight nudge would cause the sub to blow apart and the whole crew to suffer unimaginable deaths. One of the worst parts of being in a submarine, other than the claustrophobia, the intense heat from all the machines, and the horrifying knowledge of being hundreds of feet under the water, was that when something happened, everybody died. There was no escape when a submarine was damaged, which they often were. When the unthinkable happened, all the crew members went down with the ship. Number 2. Chemical fighters. Chemical fighting was the most terrifying thing that happened during World War I. The terror began on April 22, 1915. German forces along the Western Front fired over 150 tons, 300,000 pounds of devastating chlorine gas at a pair of French divisions in Belgium. It was the first major gas attack by the Germans, and it killed just about every single Allied soldier on the line. The Allied soldiers had not been expecting an attack with gas. They were actually waiting for the first wave of German troops and were beginning to get worried when there was nothing but silence. Then, a literal cloud of chlorine gas floated across no man's land and into the trenches. 4 miles, 6.4 kilometers of soldiers were decimated by the gas. It was so effective and killed soldiers so quickly that the Germans didn't even know what to do. They failed to take advantage of the attack and didn't push forward, allowing the Allies to hold position. Nobody could have imagined the truly devastating effects of using chemical warfare. The second gas attack was on April 24th against a division of Canadian fighters. It was immediately after this that France and Britain began developing their own chemical weapons and supplying their soldiers with gas masks. Still, anyone caught in chemical warfare usually died. Roughly 500,000 troops were injured by toxic gas during the war, with around 30,000 deaths. Number 1. The runner. Being a runner was one of the most perilous yet important jobs you could have during World War I. As you can imagine, communication was a bit trickier in the early 1900s. They didn't really have long-range methods of relaying messages between units. The only option was to use a telegraph, a telephone, a colored flare, or mirrors to reflect light in Morse code. They also tried to use dogs and pigeons, but these weren't always the most reliable. The best way to get a message from one place to another was to use a runner. Human runners were usually low-ranking soldiers. They were people chosen for their fitness level, along with their ability to read a map and to memorize a message. These people would be sent off in any kind of weather through some of the most dangerous areas of fighting to deliver critical information from one group to another. World War I veteran Lieutenant Alan L. Dexter was quoted in a 1931 news article saying, "With a runner, it was merely a question of how long he would last before being wounded or killed." And this was true. Runners would often have to sprint over a mile through the trenches and then out into the wilderness. And this was a dangerous thing because snipers and machine guns would try to take them out as they were running. Being a runner was basically like playing dodgeball with bullets. Number 10. The use of DDT. DDT, dichlorodiphenyltrichloroethane, is a colorless and tasteless chemical compound that was first developed as an insecticide in 1939 by Swiss chemist Paul Müller. The U.S. military used it during the second half of World War II to prevent the spread of insect-borne diseases like malaria, dengue fever, and typhus. Soldiers were given a supply of DDT powder and told to sprinkle it in their sleeping bags, and entire towns in Italy and the South Pacific were dusted with the chemical to keep their flea and mosquito populations under control. And it was very effective. As a result, the Second World War was the first war where fewer soldiers died from disease than in battle. DDT was widely seen as a miracle substance, and in the years following the war, it became readily available in the US and elsewhere. But as it turned out, the chemical has severe environmental and health impacts. DDT is an endocrine disruptor, meaning it interferes with hormones, and it's also a carcinogen that has been linked with pancreatic cancer and liver cancer. Long-term exposure can also have severe effects on the reproductive system and on embryos and fetuses. Simply put, the chemical is at least moderately toxic. Therefore, DDT has been banned in the US since 1972, and a worldwide ban was put into effect in 2004. Number 9. Mobile bathing and laundry stations. The first permanent laundromats and dry cleaning services at U.S. military bases around the country came after World War I. When World War II broke out, these services and facilities were extended to American military bases overseas. There were also mobile laundry stations and showers. Soldiers were taught how to use the on-the-go washing machines over a 12-week period at Camp Lee in Virginia. Laundry units consisting of 3 officers and 85 enlisted soldiers were then dispatched wherever they were needed, including to remote forested sites with no laundromats nearby. As many as 6 washing machines were packed into vehicles resembling semi-trucks, churning out 125 pounds, 57 kilograms of clean laundry per hour. Each load of laundry cost 50 cents, and while officers and enlisted men received priority service, civilians also utilized the service. Showers were available to soldiers free of charge and consisted of anywhere from 8 to 24 shower heads. These mobile units also offered fumigation services to get rid of insects. They probably used DDT. Both the laundry and shower facilities were meant to keep troops clean and lice-free, but to also boost their morale. I'm sure most people can agree that feeling clean does wonders for one's mental and emotional state, even amid trying circumstances. Number 8. Hygiene Movies. Before heading off to the battlefield, servicemen were required to complete hygiene training, which involved watching a film instructing them on how to properly wash their bodies and shave. As silly as this may seem, the educational movie was not because the men didn't know how to bathe. The officers simply wanted to reinforce the policy for the sake of promoting personal and collective hygiene among the ranks. Upon learning their destinations, soldiers received site-specific hygiene training. Europe-bound troops learned about trench foot and typhus, for example, while those headed to the Pacific Theater were educated on malaria, parasites, and water safety. The most influential film material made by the military was a 7-film series called Why We Fight, made by Frank Capra. Created after the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, it was designed to teach men the nature of America's involvement in the war. Some of Hollywood's biggest movie stars at the time, including Jimmy Stewart and John Wayne, participated in the making of the military's videos, which taught recruits everything from patriotism to the basics of staying clean and healthy. We'd laugh today, and I bet they laughed back then, but these films were still a key part of military culture back during the war. Number 7. The Milbank Disinfector. To combat lice and lice eggs during World War II, the U.S. Armed Forces ran their bedding, clothing, and rugs through a British-developed portable device called the Milbank Hot Air Disinfector and Drying Machine. It rid as many as 100 suits or blankets of bugs and their eggs in an hour or less by circulating hot air measuring 338 degrees Fahrenheit, 170 degrees Celsius through its mixing chamber. As effective as the Milbank Disinfector was, it struggled to keep up with the lice infestations of World War II. It was entirely possible for the freshly cleaned items to immediately become infested again. Lice was a major problem in World War II, especially because these bugs spread typhus and other diseases. Many prisoners in occupied Ukraine became louse feeders at the Lviv Institute for Typhus and Virus Research, acting as human sources of blood for typhus-infected lice for the purpose of researching potential vaccines against the illness. Louse feeders were at a significant risk for infection, but they received extra food rations and avoided being sent to labor and concentration camps in exchange for their services. They only spent an hour per day feeding the lice via a device attached to their leg, and this freed up time for the many louse feeders who were intellectuals before the war to engage in their research. And as dangerous as louse feeding sounds, it was arguably life-saving for some people because it kept them away from the war violence. Although the typhus vaccines developed at the Institute were meant to fall into German hands, some employees worked to smuggle the shots to the Polish resistance and even to concentration camps. Number 6. STI Prevention. STIs like syphilis and gonorrhea were common among single U.S. soldiers who sought companionship and often had multiple different partners while fighting in World War II, particularly those serving in the Army and Navy. This prompted officials to launch a campaign to test the troops, to encourage wise, intimate decisions, and to carefully track disease outbreaks. Soldiers were urged to either remain abstinent or to commit to long-term monogamous relationships with STD-free partners, and they were also encouraged to always wear condoms. The U.S. government printed a series of brochures about maintaining good sexual health. They contained information to help troops easily diagnose and treat diseases, and medics were equipped with the proper medications for doing so. These pamphlets also offered wisdom, reminding soldiers that manhood is defined by having healthy reproductive organs and that intercourse is not necessary to keep strong and well. The literature also offered ominous warnings, including the possibility of an STD ruining a man's body and that most prostitutes have venereal disease. Troops were urged to avoid gambling their health away to so-called easy women, and that if an individual absolutely lacks self-control, to at least practice safe sex. Number 5. The shoe pack system. During World War I, around 2,000 U.S. soldiers and 75,000 British soldiers died from a serious condition called trench foot, also known as immersion foot syndrome, which is caused by the feet remaining wet for too long and a lack of dry socks and shoes. Trench foot deprives the feet of nutrients and oxygen, causing them to lose circulation and nerve function. Ultimately, it leads to worse conditions like gangrene, ulcers, permanent nerve damage, and even death. To prevent history from repeating itself during World War II, the British government encouraged women to make socks for soldiers, and factories shifted their production to sock making. In 1944, the U.S. implemented the shoe pack system, which provided troops with waterproof lined boots. Manufactured by L.L. Bean, the shoe pack was made of layers of rubber and leather and lined with felt to maintain warmth. The footwear was in short supply, and sometimes men had to wear the wrong size, but it was effective as long as they frequently changed their wool socks and kept their feet dry. If they didn't, they ended up with a condition called macerated feet or shoe pack foot, which caused the bottoms of the feet to get all wrinkled and waterlogged. It was not a pleasant sight. To ensure that troops used their shoe packs properly, the military established rules for wearing time and changing socks and insoles. There were also shoe repair teams, which made it much easier and quicker for soldiers to get their boots fixed than it was during World War I, when they had to rely on local contractors who used inferior materials and didn't work well. Number 4. Oral Hygiene Kit. During World War II, many soldiers suffered from a condition called trench mouth, which was caused by stress, malnutrition, and inadequate dental care, leading to bleeding, pain, and gum decay. In 1942, the War Department urged American soldiers to brush their teeth at least once daily to maintain their oral health. Troops were also issued hygiene kits containing tooth powder and toothpaste, the latter of which was previously only a luxury item afforded to society's more privileged classes. After the war, toothpaste became a common household fixture. The U.S. Army's promotion of dental hygiene among its ranks also helped spread good habits to American households. While society became aware of the benefits of brushing their teeth as early as 1915, many soldiers were rejected from serving in World War I because they did not have the minimum of 12 teeth that the military required. You heard that right. Some people were rejected for being too toothless. Think about that for a sec, and then take a moment to appreciate how far dental health has come. During World War II, the military strongly pushed soldiers to brush their teeth regularly, and the practice subsequently took firm hold among American families. In addition to tooth powder and toothpaste, World War II hygiene kits were equipped with a toothbrush, razor blades, shaving cream, and toilet soap, and soldiers received weekly rations of cigarettes, chewing gum, tobacco, candy, and matches. Do you know anyone missing all their teeth? What happened? Tell me about it in the comments down below. Then remember to subscribe to American Eye if you haven't already. Number 3. Halazone Tablets. Having clean drinking water was imperative to soldiers' health on the battlefield, but the battlefield often lacked modern plumbing and other conveniences. Pressed to develop a sterilization method for water during World War II, the military looked for a non-toxic, quick-dissolving chemical that could withstand extreme humidity and temperatures and did not taste or smell terrible. Until then, soldiers relied on chloramine tablets, which took too long to dissolve and did not work in high temperatures for very long. While its effects on bacteria were slow, a substance called halazone came onto the scene in 1942 for lack of better alternatives. It was first given to troops in the Philippines after being approved by the Medical Department Technical Committee in 1944. Halazone was capable of purifying canteens containing water that was up to 2 years old and was extremely useful in places that lacked purified drinking water. Tablets were included in soldiers' sea ration packs until 1945, near the end of the war. Once opened, halazone had a shelf life of just 3 days, making it impractical in many ways, even if it was the best option available at the time. During the 50s, it was replaced by iodine-based tablets, which last for up to 3 months. Number 2. Water warnings. Water was a confusing topic for soldiers during World War II, who received seemingly mixed messages from their superiors and the government about the use of it. With the importance of staying clean drilled into troops' heads, many were quick to bathe using the local water supply wherever they were serving. Little did they realize, it often caused parasites, skin infections, and other serious ailments. For this reason, the military began issuing site-specific water warnings to soldiers. For example, men stationed on the island of Leyte in the Philippines were instructed not to swim in fresh water or to use it for washing their clothes for fear of catching schistosomiasis, also called bilharzia or snail fever, a condition caused by a parasitic flatworm that invades the urinary and digestive systems. Snail fever is second only to malaria as the most devastating parasitic disease, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC. Symptoms usually start with itchy skin or a skin rash and are followed by a fever, cough, chills, and muscle aches, which set in over the next month or two. People sometimes experience no symptoms at all, but the parasite's presence eventually takes a toll, leading to liver, intestine, lung, and bladder damage. In rare cases, eggs reach the brain and/or spinal cord and cause seizures, inflammation, or paralysis. A snail fever outbreak during World War II caused the military to strengthen its water policies, ordering troops to only use water from approved places for drinking, bathing, laundry, and washing their vehicles or floors, and banning them from wading, swimming, bathing, or washing their clothes in local freshwater. For additional protection, soldiers serving in at-risk areas watched a film warning them of the dangers of snail fever and received rubber boots and other protective gear. Number 1. Food restrictions. Knowing that eating the wrong thing can have serious health implications, the U.S. military imposed strict guidelines on what foods its soldiers were allowed to consume. For example, American soldiers could buy food at public restaurants in the UK, but not on the European mainland. But this and other policies were hard to enforce, and many soldiers ignored the rules and got food from places they shouldn't. This behavior worsened as the war dragged on and their rations became more meager, featuring fewer meats, fruits, and variety in general. Military kitchen personnel were specially trained before heading overseas to cook for the troops, with the goal of improving cleanliness and food quality standards. Mess halls received regular visits from sanitation experts, who ensured that the facility and its workers adhered to safety and hygiene standards. When necessary, inspectors subjected food handlers to additional scrutiny. It's not something we always stop to think about, but it doesn't take much to acquire a foodborne illness, and this was especially true during World War II, which saw 190 outbreaks among over 22,000 people, according to a 1958 report by the U.S. Army Medical Service. 76 of the confirmed outbreaks were outbreaks of staphylococcal food poisoning. Within 3 to 4 hours of eating, an infected soldier suffered from nausea, vomiting, and/or diarrhea. While most returned to duty within a few days, food poisoning can easily be fatal, which is why the military took it so seriously. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you next time for another exciting video right here on American Eye.